we're doing this study. Brian started, of course, back in December for overcoming worldliness, something we all need to be concerned about and attentive about. We've been dealing with, actually last week and this week, the overall topic of immodesty, or you could just put it in a more positive way, modesty, whichever way you want to describe it there. Just as a matter, oh, by the way, I do have this device again. Some of you may remember this from last week. Brian was reluctant to turn it over to me, but we're going to give it another try. I kind of forgot about it for a while there. So maybe and this is pretty sad, but see all the different colors here? These actually mean something related to a slide or two as I go along. So we'll see how that works out, But in any event, we're going to go through this and try to keep the slides reasonably in order here. But as we go, why don't we start off?
You already broke it.
Yeah.
There we go, right there. All right. This is the very beginning. I'm not going to go to the next slide because I do want to do a quick review and see how many people may remember from last week. Let's get and you can just raise your hand and I'll recognize you and tell me what your thoughts are on it, what you recall from last week. What are some negative things, some negative aspects of wearing clothes that are not modest? And this is especially true for Christians. What are some negative things that can stem from that lack of wearing modest clothing? Anything that we may have discussed last week? Lust, yes, and that could be what related to that. I'll just go ahead and add something to some of these as we go along. Lust, and one of those things is it can cause others to stumble, right? Because their lust is whatever, and then they stumble, and other Christians can do that. What's another negative aspect, though, that we talked a bit about when it comes to not being modest in your dress? What are some other things that come from that?
Saying a different perspective of Christians.
Yeah, it sends the wrong message, right?
Right.
I mean, a person could be, generally speaking, a Christian who wants to live a godly life, and generally speaking is doing so, but perhaps because of an unwise choice of clothing, it may send to some people the message, this is just a suggestion. This is not what God says we should do with our bodies and how we're clothed and all that, and undermine what you might be trying to do in speaking to them about Jesus and stuff like that. What's a couple of others, and we'll move on. What's a couple of others here that we might mention here?
It distracts people from what they're doing a lot of times if you get somebody in there.
Oh, well, and I mentioned how men especially seem to have a problem a lot of times, right? Getting distracted by different things. But another one here is we got into the issue of nakedness, and I remember you brought up the point that we need to distinguish between nudity and nakedness, right? That even myself, I consider myself fairly well educated, and have a decent vocabulary. I had not really differentiated between being naked and being nude. You know what I'm saying? Like naked is kind of half naked or maybe more, and nude is completely naked. You know what I'm saying? No, again, not trying to, am I right? Okay, I got the definition there. And I had never really I was just like naked, nude. But when you're studying things of this nature, it is important because someone said, well, I'm not nude, I'm fine, right? Well, you're not nude, but you're naked. And that's not necessarily what we should be doing either, So that's something to think about. One more thing here, some in fact, in the outline here, it could be considered outright rebellion against God, right? Because, and we'll talk more about this as we go along, but one of the aspects of that that's important is whose body is it, right? Whose body, this flesh and bones that we have, who does it really belong to, right? And I see people pointing upward and whatnot. We believe as Christians that this is God's body, and we're to conduct ourselves in a way that we don't mistreat it and we don't have disrespect for it and God who made us. So, all right, let's move on then into this next thing. I thought this would be maybe a good time to go from one lesson into the next. I think we talked a bit about last week about how, some of the extremes that you're starting to see with what people wear, or, never mind. Just look at me and just wink, all right, and I got it. All right, modesty. Before we get into modesty, let's talk about an article I pulled up, because I said, I think all of us, especially most of us in here, very few people in here don't get on a computer or phone at some time and have access to the internet and have the news and stuff. But I came across this. I said, I got to share this real quick. I'm not going to go through the whole article, but at least the first couple of paragraphs here. It's from USA Today, and this was from January 23rd, so this is very recent. And it's entitled this: Kylie Jenner, Hailey Bieber, and more Gen Z stars spark no pants fashion trend. Okay? And it starts off, this is, by the way, so you can send some bad emails to this person. I'm going to tell you their name. No, the person that wrote this, because they seem to not be too worried about it, Hannah Yasharoff or something. She's the writer of this. But let's go on. No pants, no problem. Kylie Jenner, Hailey Bieber, Bella Hadid, and more stars and fashion notables seem to think so. They are ushering in a Gen Z fashion trend of leaving the house in just tights or underwear-esque briefs. No outerwear required. Sound risque? It's just the latest way this generation is taking creative clothing liberties to rebel. So at least they're saying they are rebelling. I mean, they're calling it like it is there in some ways. Fashion is just expressing what's going on broadly in culture, says longtime business and culture journalist Christina Binkley, not Christine Brinkley, who is a famous model. This is actually her cousin. No, I'm kidding. Christina Binkley got rid of the R and added something there. That threw me for a moment. I said, okay, it's a different person. But she says, we're in a rule-breaking era. And then it goes on to say, here's why it seems like runways, red carpets, and sidewalks are seeing fewer pants than ever before. What is the no pants trend? It can mean a couple of different fashion choices, but boils down to lingerie-inspired outfit. Some step out wearing tights as pants. Remember the uproar a few years back about wearing leggings as pants? Men's briefs with nothing else layered on top of it, see Hadid, or a bodysuit as an entire outfit. We have Fashion Week and famous models to thank, if you want to know who to thank here, to thank for this look trickling down to regular folk. And it says designers like Bottega, Miu Miu, and Burberry showcase different takes on the no pants look. And it was just a matter of time before fashion influencers such as the Kardashian Jenners, the Hadids, and Julia Fox, I don't know who Julia Fox is, made it the buzziest fashion trend since Barbiecore. Does anyone know what Barbiecore is? I don't even want to know what that is. It sounds bad. Sounds like something fairly innocent turned bad. I don't know. It goes on. I'm almost done here. It says, if you did that in the office, that's where these no pants outfits and stuff, that's the stuff of nightmares, jokes Binkley. But while it's a decidedly not safe for work fashion trend, it isn't terribly indecent by the fashion world standards. In a lot of these cases, they're not any more revealing than they would be if they were in a bathing suit. Now that may be true, right? That's probably true. And then lastly, it says, Binkley adds, it looks a little shocking to those of us who aren't accustomed to seeing that. And this is the part that struck me most of all, because it does talk about why people believe they do, why some of us believe as we do, and why some others don't. And this is what it says. It says, it looks a little shocking, but she goes on to say, but these are just rules that somebody made up at some point. Right? So to the fashion conscious, more liberal type person, hey, these are just arbitrary rules over time that, people have made up. But of course, to us as Christians, what rules are we looking at, right? We consider this God's rules, not some just, someone out in left field or something. So I just thought I would mention that in case you didn't, see an article like that yourself. It just caught my attention as we're talking about this. Well, let's go on. Let's look at a more positive view of things. And we're going to get a little more into modesty. Modesty, and this is, I'm going to read from 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, if you want to follow along. This is in the outline, but it's 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. And it goes on to say, it says, in like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel. Yeah, there we're going. All right, we're cooking with oil now, right? Or is it gas? But in any event, either one will work. In modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. And in the outline, it mentions how, the apostle here is obviously indicating that in addition to the men and how they should be conducting themselves in a godly manner, lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubting, the women, they should be accompanying the men in this effort to be godly by having godly character. And they're to show that godly character by adorning themselves in modest attire. The word for modest, by the way, or modesty in the Bible here is kazimos. And it means, in Greek, orderly, well-arranged, decent, according to the scholar Vine. You're familiar with him. Orderly, well-arranged, and decent. And you look at this, in this discussion we're having about modesty, a lot of times you're looking at keeping well-ordered in what you're wearing. In other words, don't walk in here with just a sheet on you or something. But really, it goes broader than that, right? It's your attitude toward a lot of things, And as some of you have studied and could tell me this without even looking at any outline or anything, is Christians, and it's mentioned here in the outline, our job is not really to be on the cutting edge of fashion or outrageous behavior and doing things like, hey, see me, draw attention to me. That's not really, we have enough of that in our sports, right? Football and different things, professional wrestling, you name it, right? Just the culture in general, right? A lot of it is very much, hey, let's get the attention we can on ourselves, glorify ourselves. Of course, we're not to be doing that. We should be more low-key, If we're going to be excited and a lot of energy, let's be talking about Jesus and things of that nature rather than ourselves, and glorifying what we're wearing and stuff like that.
Greg,
Yes, sir.
anytime you draw attention to yourself, you're distracting from the rest of the whole service.
Yeah. And this is especially true in a church service, but this could go for a lot of places, right? Depending on, it really is bad to come into a church service wearing something outrageous, okay? But even as we've rehearsed already, you walking down the mall in certain outfits can also cause some problems, and they're probably going to, again, you may be sending the wrong message. They're going to assume, we'll talk a little later as we have time about tattoos, about some of the messages that might stem forth from tattoos, which is a pretty interesting topic, that people have when they see you with a tattoo, they assume some certain things about you, and that could be interesting to see more about that. But let's move on here. It's a state of mind. This is Pollard mentions in his work. He says, it's a state of mind, modesty, that is, or disposition that expresses a humble estimation of oneself before God. Modesty, like humility, is the opposite of boldness or arrogance. It doesn't draw attention to oneself, or to show off in an unseemly way. We are to be bold in sharing the gospel, right? But we're not to be bold in the more arrogant kind of negative fashion that we have seen so many times ourselves. And it's interesting there. We look at 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 9. We just mentioned there, talking about the women. It says they're not to be with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. And the outline author here, he tries to point out, of course, it's not that those things in and of themselves are necessarily sinful. This is not, you don't need to leave the building tonight and say, I can never braid my hair, I can never wear any stitch of any gold on me or anything like that. It's more of the idea of, and what's interesting in the outline, it points out that, immodesty and things of this nature, it can be done not just by underdressing, it can be done by overdressing, as that was referring to there. Right? You show up, especially if you're in a more humble environment, and most of the people are not, wealthy folks, and you're wearing something like the Queen of England just walked in. That's not very modest. You know what I'm saying? So it can work in different ways. It's not just purely the amount of clothing you have on, although, again, that is oftentimes an issue in and of itself. Let's go on to propriety. Let me see if I can get my thing working here. I guess I should have. Wait, so am I going backwards? Or, sorry, I folks, I'm still trying to get. No, I am going right. All right, let's pray for me. Modest. We talked about Cosmos. I fell way behind it. Just take it out. I'm like 4 or 5 slides behind. I thought I was doing all right. I'm gonna watch a tutorial on the internet somewhere. It's on YouTube or something, but I'm not going to get distracted by a Kardashian or anybody like that. But I'm going to get on YouTube and check that out. Oh, not TikTok. All right, number 2. TikTok is probably filled with immodesty, right? All right, propriety. Now, when you talk about, there's 3 terms that were mentioned there in the passage that we looked at, and they're modesty, propriety, and moderation. They kind of run together, right? I mean, it's not like they're hugely distinct, but there is some distinction that's drawn here. Propriety comes from the Greek word eidos, and the King James Version renders it as shamefacedness. Shamefaced. I don't hear that term too often, but eidos, technically from Greek standpoint, means a sense of shame. What did we mention last week? That it seems like there is a lack of shame. You know what I'm saying? People don't seem to have the ability to be ashamed sometimes these days. But the idea behind propriety is, you know where you're at to act a certain way, right? I mean, if you're at a funeral, you act one way. You are at a circus, maybe you can act a little differently. You know what I'm saying? It's very broad in that regard. But with clothing, it's one of those things where, and I think we talked a little bit last week about culture. Different cultures. You go to a foreign country, if you want to not cause a big scene, you need to act a little differently. Now, one thing we never do is say, okay, we don't have to worry about what God has said. It's going to be purely what the culture says. No, you'll get lost and be messed up in that regard. But in addition to what God says, we do need to be mindful of the culture that we're in at that time. Never to let it dictate us to violate God's directives, but to understand where we need to be sensitive, because we might unknowingly, right, create a scene, which again, if we're a professing Christian, is not very helpful to our cause if we're doing that. And it's rude, right? It's outright rude. Moderation, here's another, basically with propriety, the last thing I'll say about that is, you got to know where the lines are drawn and where God is drawing the lines, and you don't go past those. And if you do, you should feel some sense of shame. You should do that. All right, on to moderation. This is from the Greek word, and I may mispronounce it here, sophrozoon, or sophrozoune. It means soundness of mind control, according to Thayer, a scholar. He says here, it signifies a command over bodily passions, a state of self-mastery in the area of appetite. Basically, can you control yourself, right? I mean, that's one thing I think we all recognize in a young person, right? Most young people, they lack that, right? And maybe when they get to high school age, it becomes even more pronounced. I don't know yet. Maybe, I guess I do know. I've seen some of that. Sometimes they're worse, sometimes they're not. But there's something about a person, and I'll admit, even though I'm not one that necessarily wears crazy outfits and stuff, but I don't know that I always am very in tune. I don't know if I'm not the best person to practice self-control always. I sometimes, I overeat. I kind of can be a little bit, have some bad habits and things that you wouldn't want to necessarily follow everything I do and say that's how I want to do everything. You know what I'm saying? I could probably use some better self-control. I have better examples I could point out in here and other places that these are folks that I would like to be more like them. They just have a presence about them, right? Where they have self-control. You know what I'm saying? They tend a lot of times, you can tell it to some degree. I don't want to completely generalize this way, but sometimes like when I'm teaching, I'm a little bit sometimes, whatever, off the cuff a little bit, right? Someone who's got good self-control, usually they're a little calmer. They're a little, I could probably learn to be that way, a little more, just maybe underspeak a little, not overspeak a little, things of this nature. It kind of goes hand in hand. Something we can all learn, but maybe me especially in some regards. But again, we want to remember these terms: modesty, propriety, and moderation. Something that Christians need to be aware of. We talked about culture. One of the problems that we see with this issue of Christians and immodesty is when our Christian convictions collide with the culture, right? And in the United States of America in 2023, and for a long time now, the culture is very different than what a lot of you remember 50, 50 you're already getting into that, the 60s, that's some radical looking people. But let's go back, there's a few of you in here that maybe were around in the 40s and 50s or something, and you can remember that, was Elvis by moving his hips a little bit when he was dancing on stage and stuff, like set the world on fire. Now that would be like, oh, that's extremely tame and stuff. So it is all relative, I guess, except, again, relative except not with God's word, right? There are some absolutes. Now I will say this, there's one point in here where the author here, he says that in his community, the school, the local school, I don't know where he lives, but local school had made a rule saying that they were going to not allow their students in the school to wear short shorts, mini skirts, tank tops, all the things that show the skin. Remember, what are we talking? What was the pretty much the rule that we found in the Bible, essentially saying what you need to cover up if you want to be safely sure about your being modest. You know what I'm saying? Some people might say, well, in this day and age, can you not at least have like a few inches above your knee? What do we say, generally speaking, is the general premise, at least in that outline, as drawing from the Word of God last week, was saying? Does anyone remember what marks we kind of said? I heard shoulder, but actually it was kind of down to the elbow. Elbow to the knees, and then everything in between, right? Well, so this school system where this gentleman lived, and I don't know how maybe he had children that were in the school system, he didn't say, but he said when he found out that they were creating this rule, now I would never do this, okay, but this is what he did. He actually called up the school or board or whatever, called somebody in authority, and asked about that. He said, well, is this rule going to apply to cheerleaders and other athletes, like volleyball players, et cetera, et cetera? And they say, oh, no, it won't, because yes, they do show the same body parts, some of them, but it's a uniform, and so we're not going to have that rule. Now, I'm not going to call them, I think they think you're pretty weird, calling and asking some question like that. It's like, what's your problem, But I guess what his point was, what's obvious what his point is, some of what we had talked about. And again, these are kind of difficult things. I admit, for me, historically, and even now as I sit here or stand here in front of you and speak to you, am I going to seek out somebody and condemn them because their daughter or they are a cheerleader and they're wearing a cheerleading outfit? I'm honest, I'm not going to do it, okay? I'm not. I'm putting out the information. Each one is going to be responsible before God and how they, apply that to their lives, to the lives of their children and stuff. But it is a provocative issue. It is provocative in the sense of some things we just maybe take for granted and say, well, that's not, well, we may need to look at that a little bit, something we got to talk about because it is a biblical issue. All right, let's move on to the part some of you may have been waiting for a while here, and that is tattoos. Tattoos. Okay, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who has a tattoo, all right? Yeah, I do want to know. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't want to know that. Okay. It's funny because I grew up in an era, like several of you in here. I was a tweener. I was in between the era when maybe in the 40s, World War II, post-World War II, where the military guys, the sailors, they had the tattoos and stuff. And hardly anyone else did, right? They had the tattoos. And you didn't really see them out in normal society. Even among the hippies, right, in the 60s and early 70s, you that were around, I was around, but I was drinking from a bottle of milk or something, But do you remember seeing tattoos on normal people, long-haired hippie people? Those that were up there in New York, what was it, Jimi Hendrix played? Woodstock. Who was at Woodstock? I do want to know that. No. But did you see tattoos at Woodstock? I've seen the films. I haven't seen much in the way of that. But now, and then in the 70s, 80s, when I was growing up, nobody had tattoos hardly. It was very unusual. I remember when I was in high school, not that I looked like a bodybuilder, but I got the bodybuilding magazines, and looked through there and wish that you kind of could, look that way too. And I remember all those bodybuilders, and you had the famous guys, the Mr. Olympians and Mr. Universe and all that stuff. There was one guy, I remember, that had a tattoo. Out of, you'd see in these different magazines, 60 different bodybuilders. And one guy had like a rose on his deltoid here. That was the only tattoo on that. Even now among bodybuilders, they've got the tattoos. And among regular society, and we're going to touch upon this here before we end the discussion here tonight, about the issue of, have we reached a point now, though, where tattoos and to some degree body piercings, have they gotten to the point where it's normalized? And it may not be as drastically bad as some other things like wearing real short shorts, etc. Let's look at that real quick here. This is the outline. It states this, and I think we I can verify it with some better Bible scholars than I am. The only time tattoos are mentioned in the Bible, does anyone know where tattoos are mentioned in the Bible? No. One place, according to the outline. One place. It's Leviticus. Leviticus 19, verse 28. And here's what it says. If you want to look, you can see. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord. Now, if you were in that setting then, that's a very clear directive, right? You're not getting tattoos, okay? The question, though, for us is, of course, is that still applicable now? Is that still applicable? Now, the author here in his thesis, and as he goes along in his outline, he's saying that law we're not held to anymore, like some other laws about what you eat and stuff like that. There's some principles, though. He does point out there are principles. And one of his principles was, again, drawing attention to oneself. And that he said Christians should not be on the cutting edge of things. So but let's look some more here. Let's look at let's look a little bit more at this. Let's look at you can look while I'm directing to some information here. But Philippians 2:15. You can also look in 1 Timothy 2:10 again. The thing about tattoos, and there's a study here. Let's look at let me see if I can find the study that he looked at here, and what people. Here it is. They did a study here, and this was in the Huffington Post, which is a very liberal, website, and I guess they have a magazine or something. But this is what they did. They did a study. It said in studying first impressions of people that have tattoos, researchers have found that avatars, they used avatars. Now, neutral avatars, they called it. So I don't know exactly what that meant. I don't know, I guess maybe not even real people. Maybe it was just, I don't know. An avatar can mean all kinds of things these days. I know there's a movie out on it, right? Not my kind of movie, but hey, each to his own. But what they did is they put some with tattoos and others that didn't have tattoos. And these are the assumptions, according to people that viewed these avatars. And this is the assumptions that they made about people that did have the tattoos versus those who didn't. This is what they said. They said they thought that those people that had, by the way, it's not just tattoos, other body modifications. I'm assuming, nose ring. One thing I have to say, I've never understood, and this is a personal thing, the rings in the ears, the lobes. It's so ugly to me. I'm sorry, but it just looks outright weird and ugly. I don't know why anyone would be wanting to do that, even no matter how worldly you were. It just looks awful. And then once you take the thing out, you got this droopy, crazy-looking ear lobe. I mean, there's nothing. I could maybe see a cool tattoo, and but that, I mean, come on, that's bizarre. But in any event, so we're talking about these other things too. So they're thought to be higher or more likely thrill and adventure seekers. Thrill and adventure. That's not necessarily bad. You might assume the same thing about somebody who jumps out of airplanes, right? Okay. Also, they're presumed to have a higher number of previous sex partners. That was also something, I don't know if the people just volunteered that, or if that was something you just checked off, I don't know. And then also, and generally speaking, that they were less inhibited than people who didn't have tattoos. And these are all natural things. But as the author here points out, he says, tattoos are growing in popularity and are becoming more acceptable in our society. The stigma that once accompanied them is slowly disappearing. This surprised me about them, because this guy, in looking at his work here in the prior outline, some things that Brian has mentioned from the outlines that the gentleman had supplied before, he seemed pretty conservative. You know what I'm saying? He seemed pretty, but this is what he said. He said, there may come a day when tattoos and body piercings become normal, at which time a Christian wearing them will not be considered immodest. He said, however, no Christian should find himself on the cutting edge of societal or cultural changes. I'm interpreting that to say, he's saying, if tattoos and body piercings, if they become normal, then it's not necessarily a sin that you have these things. I don't have any of those things, okay? But I'm just saying, so I'm kind of in a position where I can't necessarily relate to it entirely, like I'm not in a dilemma, oh, do I get the tattoo or not? But I will say this, how many think, at least in most of the United States of America in 2023, are tattoos pretty normalized now? They're very normalized, okay? It almost is the point now, if you're under, I say, 30 years of age and you don't have a tattoo, go to the beach. You almost see fewer people without them than with them, you know? So, again, I'm a little surprised. I'm not someone that's standing up here and is going to walk out there and I'm on this mission to stop tattoos or, you know, or even cheerleading outfits and all this. You know, but I am a little surprised that he definitely seems to be treating the tattoos and body piercings differently than what you're showing of your flesh. Whether that should be the case or not. One thing he does point out, though, again, similar to the way you dress, in a similar way, it is still not our body alone to do what we want to do. Like, for example, how many have seen Moana, or your child or grandchild watched Moana, the movie, all right? Was it Maui, who's played by Dwayne, what's his name, the wrestler guy? There you had tattoos would just pop up on his body, right? If he did certain things, he got a tattoo. But a lot of people, you know, they want this written. They have a child. They put the child's name, maybe even their footprint right there on their bicep or something, right? All these different things. And he's saying that, you know, these are really not, our bodies are not really meant to be things we just put artwork on and what we want. We need to be thinking about God's view on it. Again, though he says, again, if it becomes normalized, it's not necessarily a sin. So it's kind of like, you know, that you probably say it's kind of a gray area to some degree. I'll let you decide that or not. But the bottom line is this, it's not our own physical body. We do need to be concerned about how, I would say it's one of those things where if you're in doubt about it, right, probably just opt not to do it. You know what I'm saying? Why do something that's on the edge, may or may not be normalized to the degree it's not a sin, whatever, I don't know. You know, I will say this, another thing that he points out in his outline, and I saw this in my own father. You know, my father grew up blue-collar family in Birmingham, Alabama, okay, in the 1950s. And well, I'm not going to tell the whole story. My mother mentioned something about maybe there was another girl's initials on there that he covered up with this eagle, but in any event, I don't know that 100%. I think that's what she told me was. But he had an eagle. He had an eagle tattoo on his arm. Well, he wasn't in the military, but he was, like I said, a blue-collar background in Birmingham, Alabama. At that time, you got an eagle tattoo sometimes, maybe to cover up a girl's initials. I don't know. But I remember, and my father was an electrical engineer, so he had more kind of a white-collar type job and stuff, and I don't know if that was part of it, but I think he felt some shame over that tattoo. He felt conscious about it. So he actually had it back in the 70s, it was kind of a cruder thing to do, you know, to remove it. He had whatever you do. I don't know. He went to the doctor and they tried to do something with it. I remember him having to take, vitamin E? You put on cuts and stuff, and I remember him putting vitamin E on his old eagle tattoo that had been pretty much removed, but you could still see faintly there. And, you know, before he died, you know, his later years, I would every once in a while catch a glimpse of his old tattoo. It was still faintly there, you can see that. But again, nowadays, I do think some people that get tattoos, like a lot of them, and I hate to be, it almost again sounds sexist a little bit, but I think some of the women especially maybe are going to regret it, because if your upper body's covered with a bunch of tattoos and then you reach the age of 85 or something, I don't know, it's just not going to be quite the same as when you visited grandma and had cookies and stuff with grandma with all these tattoos all over, and it's going to be a little rougher looking, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, there's also that real practical aspect of regret, you know, down the road, you know. So, I mean,
It's because they can't tell what it is.
It's going to lose all, but you know, by then, they're going to have some super crazy method to make it look, you know, brand new again, maybe, who knows, maybe that's the next big thing. One thing that the author pointed out in his outline that I thought was kind of funny too, is he said he was going through all the reasons people get tattoos, well, some because it's self-expression, cultural aspect stuff. He said, but have you also noticed that tattoo parlors tend to be open late at night? Have you noticed that ever? The lights are on at midnight? It's because people do it under drunken impulse, you know? It actually capitalizes on people being not fully aware of, oh, I'm going to use the Marines. I'm joining the Marines. I don't know, you better not get a Marine tattoo before you go through boot camp. It's probably the truth, right? You show up with, I've known enough about reading through boot camp accounts and stuff. You don't show up at Paris Island with Marine stuff all over. No, not yet. You haven't gotten the Globe and Eagle? Is it? If you don't have that, you're not don't show up with some tattoo, you know what I'm saying? So just keep that in mind if you ever decide to join. Brian could have told you that, but I saved him the time. But in any event, let's wrap it up here, though. Seriously speaking, I think we all understand the thing. I think the biggest, and I think most people sitting here right now, this business of modesty is not an issue for most of us, but with our children and our grandchildren and it is, I have no doubt, it is a struggle to try to keep them modest in what they're wearing. And as I said last week, I said the truth is, like if you were playing, if you were a cheerleader, and they're all wearing these other outfits, and you're wearing pants down to your knees, I mean, I got to admit, that would be pretty rough, you know what I'm saying? I would feel pretty standing out too, you know? So it's a difficult question, but I still think, it's something we have to deal with. And we can also apply it to our lives in a broader sense, in the sense that, are we bringing attention to ourselves or to God? Yes, sir.
I think also you really have to consider the person before you start criticizing them, because they might be somebody that come in and they have never been taught anything.
Yeah.
So
and I'm saying all this.
What they're doing, you've got to really be careful about that.
Anybody who would stand up here and make some, real, you're all sinning because you have a tattoo. Yeah. I think I'd be pretty foolish to say that myself. You know what I'm saying? But
I've got an aunt that's 96 years old. She's still in the ministry.
Okay.
And I was talking to her a couple of years ago. I said, Aunt Wilda, I said, you remember way back in growing up, drums was bad in church because it was a beat of the devil? Yeah. I said, well, if it was then, isn't it now today? You've got drums in your church.
Right. Propriety has changed in some settings, right?
I was reading something just a minute ago from Mr. Barnes in his commentary. He made a statement that if we got our hearts right, and if we truly love religion and respect it, that dress, modesty, dress, and these kind of things will not be as much of an issue. So maybe we need, instead of trying to teach people what's wrong with these things, teach people how to not come to heart.
I agree with you to a point, but I do think in this day and age, it has become blurred so much that, again, and I'm not saying the setting is not necessarily, okay, we start measuring people's, is that skirt long enough in church when you walk in? But in the family setting, it's one of those things that you're going to have to realize that they're going to think you're weird. In other words, you could be trying to live a godly life and still wear some things that God may not approve, not because you're not in tune with what, the Bible says about most things, but because of it's just so ingrained around you that it doesn't even occur to you that I don't think a lot of young Christian ladies would even occur to them that wearing a short skirt is necessarily wrong, I'm sorry, I got two. Let me get her. I haven't heard from her yet, and then we'll go back to you.
Well, my case, for example, I work in an environment that I need to have my hair high, and having a bun, it makes my head hurt, so I have to braid my hair.
Yeah, please don't walk out here thinking that braids are a sin, all right? That is more, I'll let Brian elaborate on that, but I don't think that was, the point of that passage certainly wasn't that you cannot ever braid your hair. It's more the context of the moment stuff. Yes, sir, one last thing.
Quick question I'm not good at. I started tattooing myself at 14. I didn't know God, so I thought I did, how I could get around Him. But then I got cover-ups, okay? To remove a tattoo is $8,000. Cover-ups on it.
My dad was cheap. I don't think he paid nearly that much.
It's $100 an hour to pay this with tattoos. This was before the fact, so now I come in, because I've gotten right with God and everything. My ink's still here. It's not going anywhere.
Right.
So,
Well, and one last thing about this. This same gentleman who had the author of this outline says, look, if you got a tattoo or did these other things before you became a Christian, that's just a consequence you live with, like a lot of other things you might. You know what I'm saying? And you're certainly not going to be judged on that because of past behavior before you were a Christian. All right, I'll turn it over to Rob.
What's your song, bud?
Gladly.
912 in the big book. 912 in the big book. So I'll answer yours, Sandra. All right. In Timothy, when he talks about the braids and the gold, the issue there is your only adornment your physical appearance? Because if the only thing that you got going for you is how you look on the outside, you got big problems if you're supposed to be a child of God, a woman of God. So if your good works don't outstrip what you put into your physical appearance, you're not in the place of modesty, is what he's talking about in Timothy. You know, and it goes for men and women too. Right? A guy can go to the gym 12 hours a week, but then he complains to his wife that 1 hour of service to Jesus is just too much. Well, he's got the same problem of vanity and immodesty because he's spending all of his time on his body. You know, and that's why that passage starts out what? For men to lift up holy hands. Are you cultivating the heart of Christ, you know, as a man? And so 912 is our song of encouragement. 912. This Sunday, after morning services, potluck. What else do we have prayer request wise or announcement wise?
My cousin's best friend was on the way to see her dad. He's on his deathbed. She got in a wreck. She's broke her sternum and all kinds of stuff, and her dad did die, and she's in bad shape, so is her daughter.
Okay. All right. And of course, the family of Johnny Webb, keep them in prayer. And as soon as we have information on arrangements, we will text that out at the appropriate time.
Scott earlier today at dinner, and he said that the funeral will be at 2:00 at Archer Friday.
Okay.
Now, I didn't
2
know-
o'clock at Archer on Friday.
That's what Scott told me just now. Scott's gonna be conducting the funeral, is
Yeah.
what I heard say.
All right. So 2 o'clock at Archer's on Friday. And if we have any additional information, we'll pass that along then. So, all right. As we've been going through these lessons, at different places in different lessons, maybe you've had a check in your spirit. Maybe there's been something in one of the lessons as we've covered something in the Word of God, or as the teacher's been teaching on something, that maybe something inside you said, ain't nobody going to tell me what to do. Don't move past that. When you find yourself hearing the Word of God and you find yourself resisting what you hear, that's a place of rebellion. And we don't just use this time on Wednesday nights to just say, well, so-and-so probably should have come forward, This is a time for us in the middle of the week, because you got no guarantee you're going to make it till Sunday. You got no guarantee that 5 minutes after we leave this building, the whole planet ain't lit up bigger than Christmas, because Jesus rips the whole universe apart and he comes back. The church is filled with worldliness. The one problem with Mr. Barnes' commentary, Ronnie, is in his day, you know how a prostitute dressed? The same as every other woman. She just didn't have as many layers to her skirt. That was the trick. They could count the number of layers and they, she's a woman of ill repute. But she was covered down to the ankles. And we've touched on, how back in this time it wouldn't have been this. And people, well, you know what Elvis did wasn't that big. But had we not pulled the pin on Elvis, would we be in the place of Justin Bieber? I mean, come on, y'all. Who needs Justin Bieber? You say, had there not been a Marilyn Monroe, would there have been a Britney Spears? Had there not been a Madonna, would there have been a Lady Gaga? You say, how do you know these? Because I live in America. It's everywhere. And I come to these lessons, and in my head I go, yep, when did I get all my tattoos? When I was in rebellion. I was mad at God, I was mad at the church, and I was sick of the church, and I was sick of Christians. And I knew if I got tattoos, I would upset more Christians who didn't have time to tell me anything godly or good anyway. So we all go to hell together. That was my attitude. They could go to hell for hypocrisy, and I could go to hell for rebellion. Hallelujah. Someone, no, I'd love to get my entire body covered because they're addictive. They're addictive. But I don't. Why? Because I know. I know in my heart when I get a tattoo, it's always from a bad place. And you sitting here tonight, and it's easy to look at externals. But the scripture always tells us, we like to quote that whole thing about only God can judge our heart. If God judged your heart right now, are you really comfortable with where He'd judge it? Or would He expose the hypocrisy that some of us have in our hearts? Would He call us out on it, and would it cost us our eternity? We're going to sing this song, Burdens Are Lifted at Calvary. How long are we going to keep living and living with the burden of duplicity within our souls when all we got to do is bring it and lay it at the cross, and He'll take it up and lift us up too?